rights, economic and social justice, and struggles for peace around the world. This program hopes to inspire dialogue and action for social change in Vermont and in our country. We encourage you to find out more by calling the Peace and Justice Center at 863-2345 or stop by and visit our extensive library at 21 Church Street in Burlington.
Good morning. My name is John Tucker. I work at the Peace and Justice Center, directing the Racial Justice and Equity Project. And again today I have with me Vaughn to my right, my prominent and eminent lawyer, and across from me, Dr. Larry McCrory, Professor Emeritus from the University of Vermont. Gentlemen, as you know, at the last minute we changed our subject matter. We were going to do Randall Robinson's book, The Debt, but given the Attorney General's recent remarks to the state of Vermont concerning racial profiling, I thought that we would just jump right in. I'm going to start off with you, Larry.
Well, first of all, let me open by saying I still hope we get back to the debt one of these days. I think it's one of the most important books that's been written.
I think
we need to get back to it.
We will.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very upsetting, of course, as all of us have been upset by this recent development here in the state of Vermont. And in a society which is in dire need of education and in dire need of examples of the right thing, it was very, very disappointing to see one of the officials of the state make such horrible statements.
Could you repeat the statement to some extent?
Well, the statement was that, well, not the statement, the fact is that Vermont has an inordinate ratio both in criminal cases and also in the jails of blacks to whites.
Arrests and...
Yes, arrests and, right.
And incarcerations.
And incarcerations, absolutely correct. And it's much, much higher, as a matter of fact, than in the nation. And that's a rather bizarre kind of situation, but that's a fact. But then the Attorney General at least is reported.
Who is?
Well, we all know who the Attorney General is.
William Sorrell.
Mr. Sorrell, right. Is reported to have said that that it was very disturbing to him, but that he didn't know whether or not there was racial profiling going on, or the alternative, that blacks just commit more crime than whites. And that was very upsetting.
I'm not laughing out of humor. I mean,
no, it's very upsetting.
Yeah.
And I guess even if that were a possibility, it was sort of the wrong thing to say at that time. Anyway, it's not even a possibility in my head. I think it was Mr. Colston who pointed out the fact that Vermont is very different, as a matter of fact, than the rest of the United States in terms of its social demographics. That in point of fact, there are more black professionals here as a percentage than there is anyplace else in the United States. As a matter of fact, a few years ago, blacks were at the higher economic ladder, higher median income than whites, fewer days in hospitals, all those social indices which point out where one is in the social ladder of things. So a very disproportionate, in that sense, number of blacks to whites in terms of being professionals. Now, if you take that fact, and that is a fact still, even though it's changing a little bit, but if you take that fact and couple that with the known and documented racism in the state of Vermont in every institution in the state, you take those two things together, it seems to me that rather ridiculous that one could even entertain the thought that blacks are committing more crime without even measuring, just taking those things into consideration. That would be one of the last things that one would normally be able to come up with as an option. I don't know where Mr. Sorrell is. I mean, has he not heard about racial profiling? Has he not seen the statistics in the rest of the country. I'm bewildered how anybody could have made such a statement.
I'm going to move on to our legal expert and attack it from that, the numbers and...
All right, well, I will get to that.
Just run with it.
I will get to that, but as a preliminary consideration, I think we should consider several elements, several popular beliefs that proliferate within the state of Vermont. And I gave this speech down in Montpelier a year ago with respect to the criminal justice system. First is the perception that Vermont is isolated. Vermont is not isolated. It is close enough to Boston, close enough to New York, close enough to Montreal so that there is significant traffic through the state, not only from New England, but from the Middle Atlantic states as well. And it's not an island. I also think that there are too many people here who believe the media image, the picture postcard of Woodstock as emblematic of Vermont, that it's an idyllic, Edenic, Green Mountain state with progressive politics and even more progressive people and so forth and so on. You know, the whole Ben and Jerry gestalt has been sold nationwide as emblematic of Vermont. I think socially, in some circles, that's probably true, but for the overwhelming majority of people here, it's entirely foreign. It's an alien. It's alien. The simple fact of the matter is that there is heavier surveillance of minority communities, more reports filed by private citizens with respect to minorities. And of course, the small numbers of ethnic minorities tend to get skewed in the huge disparities that show up in statistical surveys. For example, African Americans are more likely to be charged with multiple offenses on any given occasion. A simple driving while intoxicated or driving under the influence easily and quickly goes from DWI or DUI to disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Almost without exception. You get, so, you know, one simple crime becomes three. Oftentimes, you have teenagers, for example, who are playing the boom boxes and talking loud on Church Street and so forth. You know, officer comes along while you're creating a disturbance. What? You've got to be kidding. Well, now it's disorderly conduct. I'm going to take you in. You've got to be kidding. Well, that becomes resisting arrest. You see? And very quickly it multiplies. And that shows up in the statistics. But I think that you know, there are some common misconceptions that are just as endemic to Vermont as they would be in South Boston or South Carolina or just about anywhere else in the country. They are media images that have been foisted upon the public and sold as articles of faith.
You know, I mean, when I read it and sent off a email to Bill Sorrell, and the thing that hit me was that this was even more dangerous in Vermont than it would have been in someplace else where there's not a critical mass.
Of course.
Because consequently, given all this citizen rule that they pride themselves on, it goes down to the same. Is it possible for a young minority to get a fair trial, for example, in this state? Is it possible that young minorities get treated in the same way that the majority get treated? This, I feel, in this state is even more injurious because I don't know how you two feel about this, given the smallness of the population and how it would affect. For example, in Burlington, they have what they call a commission-run government. That means every major department is governed by a commission of citizens. And so I think it's impossible. I think that institutional racism reigns supreme in the state. That's my own given thing. And that by this statement, the Attorney General gives rein to those emotions. Now I want to hear how you two feel about it.
Well, I feel exactly that way. First of all, profiling is not anything new. and it certainly is not limited to the criminal justice system. Profiling is part of a mindset. You see it in banks. Black people are treated differently in banks as far as loans are concerned. You see it in schools, in every level of education. You see it in industry, you see it in the healthcare system, and on and on and on. Whites are taught early and effectively just who the criminals are. They're taught just who the bad actors in society are. They're taught by the movies that they see. They're taught by the news media. They're taught by every educational endeavor that I've ever seen. And they come to believe these images that you're talking about, Vaughn. Immigrants from Europe have for years been taught, watch out for black people when you get to America, for God's sake. It's part of the mindset of white America. Look at the Willie Horton thing. If you remember the anti-Dukakis ads, the political ads, in which Willie Horton, the black rapist, was shown in the revolving door. Right. And that was supposed to scare white America, and indeed it did. It did. Can you imagine if they had used a white rapist in that, what would have happened?
There are no white rapists,
Of course, you see. No, as a matter of fact, there are white rapists, but I can tell you what white America would have said. There is a bad man. As opposed to Willie Horton, you see black men rape. So all of us then have to bear that kind of a response. Look at the man in Boston. What was his name?
Charles Stewart.
Charles Stewart, who shot his wife.
His pregnant wife.
Stabbed her, right?
No, he shot her.
No, he shot her. He shot his pregnant wife.
Okay.
He shot his pregnant wife right there in downtown Boston in the car. And when the police came, he said, a black man did it. See, he understood the United States better than most people do, okay? He knew that that's all he had to say.
And what happened as
It's a mindset. As a consequence of that, the cops went all over Boston, stopping every black man that they saw in the street.
But one neighborhood in particular.
Yeah, I know, but wait a minute. I need to ask whoever the audience is out there, I need to ask white men, how often has any of you been stopped because there was a crime reportedly committed by a white person? How many of you have been stopped? I can assure you, this man has been stopped, he's been stopped, I've been stopped, and every black man I know has been stopped in one way or another because somewhere in the neighborhood, a black man committed a crime. This is what I'm talking about. Of course it's racial profiling, and that's my point. Susan Smith, who drove her kids into the lake, said a black man stole them. And there it goes again. This is part of being an American, this mindset. And that's what's so dangerous about the kind of statement that the Attorney General is making.
Vaughn, what's the big resistance in the criminal justice system? I mean, it operates off of racial profiling.
Well, you know, the criminal justice system is run by human beings who have the same kinds of biases as society at large. And those biases are going to be reflected and show up throughout the system. They are reflected in heavier and more drastic charges that have been made by prosecutors, by the police, harsher sentencing, covert discrimination, and any number of other manifestations of it. You know, throughout the system is rife with that. Most judges are conservative, and they think they are doing the work of the people and the will of the people when they take people who are supposed to be inherently dangerous, inherently criminal, innately antisocial, and put these people behind bars for disproportionate amounts of time.
Well, what's the other side of racial profiling? Is black-on-black crime treated in the criminal justice system the same as black-on-white crime, for example?
No, not at all, and we know that.
So that's part of racial profiling also?
Of course it is.
That's part of discrimination.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a very large part of it. And of course, you know, you have, you know, the judicial system. You've got judges who have the same human biases as anyone else. At one symposium a couple of months ago involving several Vermont judges, one of them said, quite bluntly and unapologetically that he routinely sets higher bail for black suspects because he knows that black people come from cities and that they have violent records and that they have no community contacts here.
Say that again. Repeat that.
This judge said that he routinely sets higher bail for black suspects and defendants because they come from large cities, they have violent records, and they have no community contacts in Vermont.
Where do the police stand in this?
Well, actually, you know, if you take a good hard look at it, the police are probably a little more liberal than the judiciary because they've been sensitized and they've been trained. They know when they're in a danger zone. For example, I was pulled over in South Royalton about a year ago.
What?
I was pulled over in South Royalton, Vermont. Troopers approached the car and asked me for a license and registration and so forth, and I gave it to them. And then they said, well, where are you going? Where are you coming from, and where are you going? And I said, well, wait a minute. First of all, answer me, why am I being pulled over? Well, we'll get to that. But I said, well, I am coming from a meeting of the Board of Trustees of Vermont Law School, of which I am a member. I am an attorney, and I am on my way home to Essex. And at that point, the entire discourse changed. The entire tone of it changed. They became much more conciliatory. Well, we just want to tell you that you have a taillight out. And I said, well, wait a minute. How do my whereabouts and my comings and goings, what does that have to do with a burned out taillight? Well, this is just routine practice. It's routine police practice. You know, this is rather typical. And when you take a smaller segment of the population and put that segment under a microscope, you are going to see all of the warts. You would see the same thing with any segment of the population that you took and put under the microscope and profiled.
Larry, what is your what has happened in your lifetime personally around racial profiling?
All of these things. I'm serious. I mean, listen, I'll just tell you one thing. I was coming home from school when I was a graduate student in Chicago, in your town. I was going home and I walked through a neighborhood in which reportedly a black man had broken into a house. And so a police car drove up. As I was walking along the street, they jumped out, grabbed me, threw me up against the car, you know, spread eagle. Right. My briefcase was flying, papers were flying all over the place. And I had to call one of the professors at the University of Illinois to get myself out of that situation. Now that's just ridiculous. And I could tell you 8, 9 stories like that off the top of my head. But we know this goes on. I mean, the thing that bothers me more about this particular thing that we're talking about is that the whole country knows this goes on. And so why doesn't the Attorney General understand that this goes on? And why doesn't he educate himself in terms of the kind of things that we're talking about? I see meetings in Montpelier on this subject. I don't see Laura Fishman there. We have an expert in the criminal justice system.
Top expert in the state.
Absolutely, right here in Burlington. Why isn't
she wasn't on that blue ribbon panel?
Why isn't she being consulted in all of this? My God, this woman is an expert in this area. It's just another piece of what I say is institutional racism.
Didn't they have a blue ribbon panel last week, supposedly in Montpelier? Not one minority face.
I didn't see any. Maybe she was there. I don't know. I haven't talked to Laura, but I didn't see her. At any rate, whether she was there or not is irrelevant. They ought to be knocking on her door all the time.
Why she wasn't even quoted in the article is just what bothers me, and it's so typical. And so, to go back to my original point, I don't think there's any part of the state government of Vermont that racial profiling doesn't go on, either consciously or unconsciously.
Well, That's what I was saying anyway.
Yeah.
I think it's an inherent piece of America.
Yeah.
And
what was the
where
arrest
they
rate?
are.
Something like 163 per thousand in the state? And 34 incarcerations per thousand, less than 2 per thousand for whites.
Yeah, something like that.
And I feel, I mean, sure, we had a high earning middle income, but I think poor people of color, young people in particular, whether they're middle class or not, are targets from the time they walk out the house to the time they get home.
Yes.
You're the father of 2 young sons.
Yes.
Is that a concern of yours?
It's a major concern of mine.
I mean, what happened to Hal Colston's son is a perfect example of that.
All of us fear that in Vermont.
Yeah. And you've been
All of
going
us
through
fear
that since you brought your children here.
For 35 years, yes. Absolutely.
And as you're aware of, my youngest daughter's first instance of this occurred here in Vermont at 6. And we were told different things. They're only children, they're kids, you know, I mean, right down to the racial harassment of children of color in the Vermont public schools. See, the denial, Larry. How do we get past the denial?
We can't. I'm losing hope, John. And that's an awful thing for a teacher to say because you know, changing behavior is what a teacher is about. And if a teacher doesn't believe that behavior can be changed, it's a pretty sad thing. And in all these years that all of us have been fighting these things, I've gotten to a place where I'm losing hope. I don't see any change taking place. I see the same things that I had to fight in the school system, and I've said this over and over again, for my daughters and my son. Now my daughter is going through those same things with her daughter. So my grandchild is subjected to the same kind of things that my children were subjected to, and that's a 30-year span.
I need to turn to Vaughn again.
Yes.
Vaughn, laws have been written, but the laws aren't enough. And you're a lawyer. So what I'm asking is the criminal justice system innately racist? Is there any way we can change it?
Well, I think that the only way you can change the criminal justice system is to change people, in essence, because people administer the criminal justice system. It's their exercise of judgment and discretion that determines how that system operates.
And their expectation.
Right.
Their expectation of what those officers
So what is life like for a black prisoner in Vermont? And Laura's an expert on that, too.
well, we should talk to Laura.
What is it? What can I mean? If you look at the criminal justice system in Vermont,
You see, I think it can be changed, as a matter of fact. I mean, it's not going to be eradicated. I don't think racism will ever be eradicated in this country. But I think things can be better. And I think, I mean, some of the leaders of the police have tried to have seminars, to have courses. You and I have been involved in much of that. And I think awareness has increased at that level. Vaughn said, for example, that the police are much less conservative, or seem to be in many cases much less conservative than the judges. Part of that, I'm sure, is because the police have been subjected to various kinds of workshops and so forth. In Burlington, they were trying hard under the former police chief to really make some inroads.
yeah, but I think
in this area.
See, again, but the former police chief wasn't put off by people who are outspoken. Are you hearing me?
You mean Kevin Scully?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
And there are white people that want to be stroked about this issue. They want us to stroke them and say, I know we abused you and humiliated you, but we're going to get better at it, you know? And
Well, I don't know. I thought I read someplace where the present chief wants to do the same kinds of things. I don't know. I hope that's true.
the proof of the pudding will be in what?
No, I know, in seeing them happen. But I'm just hoping that this is the case. I have had calls from two chiefs of police outside of the Burlington area who have asked me to participate in these kind of seminars.
I believe that.
And workshops. So I think there is at least some recognition that there's a problem, okay? And some endeavor to try to move before it's too late. You know, you and I have been saying for years now, John, and I guess maybe it's becoming too late, but you and I have been saying that, that here in Vermont, there is still a chance to head these things off before they get to the place where you can't turn them around at all.
But I want to go back.
But we're losing time.
I know, but
okay.
I want to go back to the fact I haven't heard one leader in this state counteract Bill Sorrell's
Well, then that's
statement.
very sad.
And I'm not talking about people who've been appointed to corrections and the police force.
Yeah, I know.
I'm talking about, I want to hear responsible leadership. Because we're right back to what we were talking about when we were in our previous roundtable discussion when we were talking about the voting business. I don't see any moral leadership around this yet. I don't see any condemnation of that kind. And whether he said it or not, and whether he intended to say it, is not the issue here. And in some ways, it might be better that his unconscious came to the fore and he got it out. I mean, at least we know what we're dealing with. I'm more worried about those who sit there and say all the right things and then go back to their courtrooms, go back to their offices, and continue the same old game. How do we get to that, Larry? You keep saying we're hopeful.
Well, you see, because I believe in education, John, and my problem is that I don't know how to get to the people that Vaughn is talking about. How do you get to the judges? How do you re-educate people at that level? I have no idea. I mean, my thrust has been to get to the kids, to get to the young people, the people in college or high school or grade school, and try to get their heads screwed on right and begin their journey through life with the right kind of value system. How do you get to the people that we're talking about? How do you get to judges? Judges are old people like me. How do you change those people? I don't know.
I think you need to appoint black judges in the state of Vermont. To my knowledge,
Do you think that'll make much difference?
There has never been a black judge appointed anywhere in the state of Vermont, to my knowledge. I could be wrong, but I've asked around.
Only thing I'm concerned is they may go find Clarence Thomas's brother. And then we'll be worse off.
Well, you know...
I mean, and that's what they do in this state, Larry.
We're saying that almost as a joke.
But I'm concerned about it.
But there's a lot of truth in that.
That's right.
That in order to be chosen, you may have to be that way. And that's the antithesis of what we're talking about.
That's my problem.
Okay.
And because I don't see us as a group doing anything to take this state on and this small population, really taking and condemning and coming together around these issues, right? I mean, maybe I'm crazy. I mean, I'm sure in some people's mind I am. But I know that 3 of us are taking a terrible chance by having this conversation and making it public.
Well,
and
we've been taking those chances for a long time.
And,
all of our lives.
All of our lives.
And that profile.
I mean, it hasn't been a day that I can remember.
Because really what this state is looking for, I'm not sure that we're 3 voices that they want to hear necessarily about this issue. I think and that's why I worry, Vaughn, about when you say appointed judge. I mean,
well, you know, essentially you have quite a number of people here who are in denial about the issue.
Right.
Who would swear up and down that it doesn't exist, or that if it does, it's not of great significance. But, you know, it reminds me of, you know, the guy who's walking along the beach picking up shellfish and throwing them back in the ocean, and somebody comes up to him and says, well, you know, why are you doing that? You know, it's useless. It doesn't mean a thing. Guy picks up a shellfish and says, throws it back in the ocean, it does to that one.
okay.
I think...
Okay, Vaughn.
Yeah, go right on. You're on a roll.
Okay, and I think most immediately what we need in the state of Vermont is to completely revamp the first offender policy and the sentencing guidelines, the sentencing grids, because too many young lives are ruined by criminal records that arise from the most minor offenses, shoplifting, for example. You know, these kinds of things are treated very, very disparately in the courts. A white kid shoplifting a $2 bottle of nail polish out of a Brooks pharmacy will be released to the custody of her parents.
And what happens to a black kid?
A black kid caught shoplifting a $2 bottle of nail polish out of a Brooks pharmacy will get 60 days in the youth home.
What?
Well, you know, those studies have been done, incidentally.
Right.
I mean, these are published things. These are
Yeah,
not,
I mean,
these are not just
you know,
anecdotes.
this isn't a revelation here.
I mean, my God,
know these
there are
things.
articles on this. I mean, white kids get sent to a hospital. White kids get sent to look at their mental state.
And
black kids get put in jail.
Yeah, and see,
but
the judges...
exactly the same offense.
Right, and see, the judges
It's
simply
incredible.
think that they are doing the will of the people
Right.
by putting dangerous or potentially dangerous offenders
Right.
and antisocial individuals behind bars and out of the public arena. That's their they think this is their charge, their marching order. That's why I say that, you know, first offender policy needs to be completely revamped, and so do the sentencing guidelines.
interesting.
There has to be some form, a major form of pretrial diversion in a lot of these criminal cases. When I was coming along, if a young man got into trouble at the age of 16 or 17, pretrial diversion would offer him the option of pleading guilty and then being sentenced to enlisting in the Army. That was what they would do to avoid criminal records with these kids. That's why you have so many former youthful offenders in the armed services today, pretrial diversion.
Well, okay. Let's go to the media in this whole thing. Did any of you see the article Sunday?
No,
in
I
the Free Press?
wasn't here.
You know this recent thing with the young woman?
Oh, I saw that, yeah.
But did they...
The Crystal
did they
Jones case?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Did they
I
tell
know
you
about the
how
case,
he
but I didn't-
dressed? Did you read that part of how he dressed? What kind of clothes
Right,
he
yeah,
wore?
yes. The baggy
Okay.
pants and the big
baggy
shoes.
pants, the
and-
big
right,
shoes,
right, right, right.
okay?
Right.
Now,
Hip Hop Nation.
Hip Hop Nation, so there you go. I mean, and that's another part of racial profiling as I'm
Yes.
concerned.
Absolutely.
About.
It's the building of a mindset.
It is.
Right.
It is.
And the
building of a
media,
mindset.
and
And the media are so guilty, it's
but
just
it's interesting
incredible.
to me that the story originally broke about these statistics and everything in the Time Argus in Rutland.
Yeah.
That should be then. It wasn't broken on TV. And I remember some years ago when we were going around to media things, and we were received well by 2 stations out of 3. Do you remember those conversations, Larry?
Yes.
One station adamantly even said there was no problem
Right.
in this state.
Right.
Really, the only media outlet that we have is what we're doing right now, where our side is even presented about any issue at all. And some people made good use of it, and some people we won't go into.
Now. But you're right.
It's a,
And
we have a media, and I have to say this, the largest newspaper in this state, and I remember when I first moved up here about that shooting that occurred with the young black man and the huge pictures of him. Remember that whole thing?
so big they could hardly get them on the page.
That's right. And now murders are being committed every time I turn the TV on by white men,
That's right.
okay? Running over people, leaving them,
That's right.
okay? Killing their workers, and there's no pictures in the paper. None.
Right.
None. And so when you say you're hopeful...
And you and
about-
I have pointed this out to the various media around here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, well.
And again, because I still think it's a problem because there's no critical mass.
Yeah.
All right? It's like if you want to see BET, you got to get DirecTV. I hate to say that on cable, but the black version of national news, they'd rather not see that as opposed to the Canadian version. of the national news. 3 Canadian stations, 1 in French. So consequently, we have a resistance. And I don't know, I think it's possible to crack it in a lot of other places, Larry, because I think that sometimes critical masses are needed. That sometimes you just have to override them. Sometimes you have to become mayor.
Well, you don't need a critical mass if you have leadership, if you have responsible public leadership. A critical mass helps, but it's not essential. Digital, and here I go again saying the same thing I've been saying, but digital wiped out sexist and racist language in the workplace in 1 year. Didn't have a critical mass, didn't have a lot of black people or women screaming and hollering. It had the leadership. It had a CEO who said, this is the way we're going. And it happened. It happened when that top person says, here's where we're going.
And that CEO, more than any CEO in this state, hired more local people of color.
Of course. I mean, these things are not isolated, okay?
Because all the big purveyors of social justice and everything, there is, and I'm saying this racial profiling goes right down to the workplace. How many times have you and I intervened over the years just to get people hired?
Of course.
People who are eminently qualified.
Right.
How many times have we seen good young black people with great qualifications leave here because it's been impossible to get a career started here, and we're eminently more qualified than those people who were in their place?
Yeah, well, that's the club. I mean, that's the way the club works. Got to be a member of the club, John, and we aren't.
Yeah.
We aren't. And
I mean, you and Vaughn came here. You were brought in by a Fortune 500 company. You came because of the university.
I came because of Norman Alpert, who brought me here. Right.
But the racial profiling goes right down into the workplace in this state.
Oh, yeah.
How many people of color have we seen forced out of jobs in this state?
Yeah.
Okay?
That's quite right.
How many times have we seen that occur? And I'm telling you, it occurs, and it goes back to the critical mass, or it goes back to some responsibility for a black middle class that is high earning and so forth, and has remained invisible sometimes around these subjects.
Well,
and has not made themselves heard.
I am not disputing anything you're saying. Critical mass, obviously, is a very, very potent kind of weapon. I just don't think there's going to be any critical mass for a number of years in Vermont. And therefore, I have to call upon Vermont citizens to provide some kind of leadership in this area. That's the only hope we have right now. I don't see, look, this is not Pollyanna. I'm not expecting it. I'm not expecting it. I'm not optimistic. You got to have some evidence to be optimistic. But at least I have a little shred of hope that that could happen.
I have.
It could happen with the right kind of leadership.
I have
somebody
known
to
you
stand
for a better
up.
part of 20 years.
All right.
Okay?
Look.
For over 30 years, you've raised your children here, and from the beginning, you have had to take this state on. From Niggerhead Mountain and Niggerhead Pond to the cakewalk, and
Yeah.
it drives me crazy when I hear Blue Railroad panels, and I pick up the paper and I read it, and I don't see your name. So I want to know how I know that you're one of the founders of the Human Rights Commission for the state of Vermont.
I'm not a founder.
But you're one of the original members.
Yes.
And served on that for how long?
9 years, I think. Longer than.
So you have committed
term.
a large portion of your professional and personal life to bettering conditions in the state of Vermont, not just for black people, but for people who don't have very many rights in the first place, to cut into the issue of classism in the state also. I don't know, Larry. Maybe you're more optimistic than me. I'm
not optimistic, John. I just have hope that people can rise above themselves. I don't know. I don't see much evidence for it. On the other hand, one of the justices of the Vermont Supreme Court called together a group to look at this very problem that we're talking about. Now, I don't know where that effort is right now, but this was about a year ago. I mean, she called together a group because
And they met last week.
Oh, okay, I don't know. I don't know where it is, but I mean,
Were you there?
But that has to be a hopeful sign.
He's not there.
Yeah, I know. Okay.
And has one of the most visible jobs that a lawyer can have that is black in this state. And
Look,
comes from probably the best law school academically in this country. Am I not mistaken?
Not probably. Definitely.
I'm glad you got that straight. What law school is that?
That did it.
That little technical school
Howard.
in West Cambridge.
It's called
Harvard.
It's called Howard.
Howard's the best black law school in the country. And there's some argument about who turns out the best lawyer sometimes around certain issues.
Maybe we ought to read his book before.
Not among people I know.
Okay.
Before we agree.
But let me ask you a question.
Before we agree
I wanna
that
get
Harvard
into
is a
that.
great law school, we should
Did
read
you
his
graduate in the lower half of your class?
Absolutely not.
Oh, excuse me. What portion of the class were you in? I want to know.
Well, we won't.
Because here we're talking about profiling, and this is an important issue.
Well,
Top 2%?
no. Top third.
The most competitive law school in the country to get into.
You see,
You
what
finish
you're,
in the top
what
third.
you're
But
forgetting.
this is not about me. This is
Well,
really
it is about you.
No.
It's about him, it's about me, and it's about all the others that are not sitting at this table. It's a perfect example of how racial profiling works, where they cut you off at the table, okay? And that's why I said to you when you made the comment about black judges.
You know why it's about you?
Why?
Because the example you gave a little while ago,
Right.
you would have been in a world of trouble if you hadn't been able to say, I'm coming from a meeting, I was this, I was that.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, suppose you were, Joe Blow out there who said, well, I'm just trying to find a job.
Or the
Or
guy,
whatever. I'm serious.
I'm just
or the
passing
guy,
through.
How about,
I'm just passing
how about
through.
how about the guy who came up here to collect his money because he won a case?
Yes.
Remember that whole
Yes.
incident?
Yes.
Larry?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Guy collected what, $15,000 or something like that? And then the bank and the cops stopped him and they arrested him.
Yeah.
Why won't your son come back here a lot?
Oh, there are many reasons for that. This is one of them.
But profiling is one of them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No question about that. He's much happier in California.
Where racial profiling goes on too.
Of course, but there's the critical mass
Yeah.
thing again, you see. It's critical
And
mass.
there's also a group of lawyers in California
Yeah, who will take on the state
who will
in a
take
minute.
that state
That's
on
right.
in a minute
In
about
a minute.
it. Okay?
You know what? I have a friend here who is black who can't even find a lawyer who will take her case. I'm serious, and she has a good case. I don't want to get into it, because that's off the record.
All three of us are aware
Of course.
what that is.
And she can't find a lawyer who will take her case. I mean, they take it and then they back off, and they back off, and
Well,
they back
one
off.
did take her case and then took a job with the institution she's in.
Yeah,
Yes.
of course. So, I mean,
It is.
it's rough.
Well,
It's rough. Now I
sometimes
can,
a place can be too intimate.
yeah,
you know?
okay, of
Sometimes
course.
A place can be too intimate.
Explain that.
Sometimes intimacy is frequently cited as a desirable. Oftentimes, though, in a place that is as small and as cloistered, especially in the business community as Vermont is, it can work to the distinct disadvantage of those who are perceived as outsiders. It's the whole in-crowd game. And, I think that, as I say, sometimes a place can be too intimate, and in a situation like that where you can't find a lawyer anywhere in the state to take your case, there's a prima facie case of it.
It begins with, what's the most asked question you've had? I know what I've had in the 2 different times I've lived in this state. Where are you from? Yeah, do you still get that one?
I get that, but I also get what I think a lot of people not a lot, but some people out there who are listening to this are going to be asking. Well, if it's so bad, why do you still live there? That's right.
Right. Love it or leave it. Love it or leave it. Yes, we've heard that before.
Why don't you go back to wherever that
I'm going
place
to
is?
tell you why I don't go back.
Oh, we can all
I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell them exactly so that you'll know this. Please never let it be said in Vermont you didn't hear the truth about this. Because as a goddamn American citizen, and I'm going to say it that way, I can live anywhere I choose. And the Constitution guarantees my right to be able to say what I think, to address the injustices that my family and myself and my intimate friends and not so intimate friends face. And Vermonters better wake up. As long as you're part of this union, you don't have the right to tell people where they can live and how they can live. You want to be part of this union, then join it. And I'm going to say that clearly. And I think part of the problem is that somehow you see yourself as better. I don't see you as better. I think you're just like the rest of America when it comes to these issues. So stop asking people where they're from. We're all Americans. And I can trace my family back a lot of times, a lot further than a lot of the people. I'm sure Vaughn can do the same thing, and Larry can. Is that too angry?
As far as I'm concerned, you can't be angry. You can't be too angry.
I call it passionate.
Yeah, so do I.
I call it passionate too.
I call it
and that's
passion,
another
too.
thing that bothers me. Have you ever noticed when you speak to a group of white people in Vermont and you get very passionate
Oh,
about
yeah.
this subject?
Oh, yeah.
What's
Oh,
the
my
first
God.
thing you hear?
Why are you so angry? Why do you have a chip on your shoulder?
He's bitter.
He's bitter. That's right. No, that's very interesting.
No, John, the response to that is, I'm not
Isn't
bitter.
that part of racial profiling?
Well,
In a way, but
yeah.
you know, the proper response to that is what Rahsaan Roland Kirk used to say. He said, I'm not bitter. I'm bittersweet.
Oh, okay. I hear that.
This is all part of that mindset thing. I'm serious. I hate to keep coming back to that, but if a white man stands up for what he believes, okay,
Then he's being what?
he has balls.
Principle.
He's being principled. Okay,
Okay.
all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Now, if a woman stands up, she's aggressive. If a Jewish person stands up, he or she is abrasive.
Right.
And if a black person stands up, he or she is violent.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Same behavior, exactly the same behavior.
Yeah.
Just incredible.
Yep.
So the profiling goes on all the time.
It goes on all the time, and it's not just in the criminal justice system. It's just that the outcome of that profiling in the justice system is horrendous, whereas in the other areas it's sort of an inconvenience.
Yeah.
And what is the price that white people who stand up against profiling, what is the price they pay? Let's talk about that just briefly. Because all of us had white friends that we've seen.
Yeah, well, the white friends that I know who stand up against this kind of thing actually are damaged more if they don't stand up. They have to stand up. Yes, of course, they get put down by their friends. I have friends, you have friends at the university, for example, who have lost their friends because they took a stand. Yes, that's a price they pay. But the people that I'm talking about are of such a makeup that if they don't stand up, it hurts even more.
There are those.
Yeah?
But then there's the good people that we know who keep quiet about it.
Yeah, well, okay, that's...
They either want to be reelected
Uh-oh.
or they want to stay in office for a long time. And let me tell you why I'm saying this. Because we have one or two politicians in the state, and I'm not talking about in Burlington, but who get elected no matter what. And I haven't seen them take a moral stand about these issues yet. One who prides himself constantly on being for human rights. And I haven't heard one word out of this person's mouth about racial profiling in his state. And all three of the national representatives, I haven't heard one word out of them about what happens to children in their school systems that their children attend and their families go to. I haven't heard them speak out. I've heard the governor speak out.
Yeah, well, that's the thing that bothers me. One of these days we're going to talk about that more, because I don't see how any responsible white person can possibly not speak out about the schools. I'm serious.
But the racial profiling, what I'm saying, and I'm hearing Vaughn say and you say, and I think I agree with both of you, is pervasive. It's in every fact of life that we face as black Americans.
That's exactly right.
We can't get around racial profiling.
No, you can't. Nope, we cannot. We cannot.
And as an issue, it's been over-legislated. There never should have been a need for all of the legislation that has been passed.
Let's close on that.
Wherever you go, on a federal and state level, to address this kind of systemic bias. There shouldn't have been a need for all of that, but there has been. And if you take a good hard look at it, it's not hard to see that this particular problem and problems that are comparable to it have been over-legislated through over the last 40, 50, 60 years. It shouldn't have been necessary. I think that we can certainly talk about changing hearts and minds, but before we even get to that point, we need to change the justice system. Yeah, I'm not so. You know, hearts and minds. Well, that's a more difficult call.
Well,
but I think if you change the justice system, it's a start, and it's a most important start for those people.
And through that, change behavior.
And change behavior. For
then maybe the hearts and minds will follow. But even if they don't,
follow.
Behaviors need to change.
Yeah.
I agree. I think we're all in agreement.
It's an overwhelming job when I think about it, but I think that, you know, I have to spend the rest of my life devoted to these issues, like you do, like Vaughn does.
I do.
Of course.
I think from the time that an 18-year-old black kid is lifted, that same kid who's shoplifted, generally he's going to get a lawyer that couldn't give a shit less about what happens to them, enter into a courtroom, going to have a probation and parole officer who's going to write up a report that at best may not be complimentary to them as they prepare them for trial, the pre-trial report.
Well, John, as a matter of fact, most of these cases don't even get to trial. What you've got is a court-appointed attorney who pleads these people.
And what happens?
You know, you get a plea bargain. You plead to a lesser offense and take a lesser sentence, but you have a criminal record nonetheless.
I think, folks, you're hearing a discussion that's not normally held in Vermont. I'm not saying that out of ego. I'm saying that out of all the times that I have spent in and out of meetings. And I think the hardest thing that address this thing is that, Larry, even those people who consider themselves allies are going to have to be in discussions such as the one we're having today.
Yes.
Where the whole, and they're not going to feel better about it, where we're not worried about hurting their feelings, because it's not a personal attack. It's about institutions.
That's right.
That make it personal.
Sure.
That's right.
It becomes personal when an individual is caught up in the crossfire of those institutions that have already been preset and already put in motion how long ago? From forever. This is not a problem that was invented today or in the last 40 or 50 years. Would you say, Larry?
No.
Historically.
As long as there has been a United States of America, and even before that.
I think that Vermont, as we attack the issue of Vermont, I think there has to be more programs like this. There has to be more discussions where we're at the table and where we don't hold back, and that they hear the very same things that I think are being heard in other parts of the country where there are critical masses. Okay?
And you'll think I'm crazy, but I still think it's doable in Vermont. I cling to that little thread. I'm serious.
When you have a grandchild, as you do, when you have children, as I do, you have to have some measure of hope.
That's right. That's true.
Okay, we have 5 minutes. Would you like to say something, 1 minute or more?
No, I think we've said as much as we need to say, quite frankly. I think we ought to let, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I think we ought to let the audience know that we're going to come back again.
Absolutely.
That it's not over.
Vaughn?
Well, I'd just like the audience to know that we would be certainly more than willing to entertain questions and possibly to speak to community groups throughout the state if it's felt that our presence would be helpful. I know that I would certainly welcome the opportunity to discuss these issues with citizens who have concerns about them.
And I think that it's important that we go as a group. And I'll tell you why. Too often in the state, they set up one person to answer issues. And you and I, between the three of us, we offer a diverse opinion around that, coming from 3 different areas.
And you and I sure have suffered from that other model you're talking about.
Yes. the single hero riding in on white horseback.
That's right.
And all of a sudden, you're speaking for 35 million black folks.
That's right.
And
yes, I agree.
That's an impossibility.
I agree.
And consequently, I also think that it's almost set up that way because you're deflecting all the, why are they so angry? You don't like me. And what we're talking about is not about personality.
No.
We're talking about institutions. And we're going to close on this note. We're going to continue these discussions, and I can assure you that I know Vaughn and Larry and I have made a commitment to meet as a group and to be talking about different issues that affect black America. And at some point, we're going to...
And white America as well.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing that affects black America that can't affect white America. And that's a very good statement, Vaughn.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just right on.
Right.
Anything, behavior that manifests itself in the black community, eventually it manifests itself in the white community. And that's been proven time and time again.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well.
Because you being a physiologist know that. I mean, communities are like a body.
Absolutely. It's a good statement. I'm glad he made it.
And that's why it's important, the 3 of us, because the 3 of us, there are things that one or the other is going to hear and not hear. Because we're not infallible. And I, myself, and if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with the Peace and Justice Center.
Mm-hmm.
Email your questions or phone them in to the Peace and Justice Center. And the 3 of us would be willing. And we're already set our agenda for the next round table that we're going to have. I'm warning you now. The book is going to be about a book called The Debt.
And it's worth reading.
By Randall Robinson, an expert that somehow never seems to make it on the major airways in this country.
I wonder why.
I think that Vaughn could tell us more about it. Since Randall Robinson was his mentor.
True.
At that law school, what's the name of that law school?
Oh, we don't want to talk about that place.
Oh, dear.
But we want to close. And we want to say thank you. And again, please address all queries to the Peace and Justice Center. I want to say goodbye to you, Larry, to you, Vaughn.
Thank you for having us on.
And to our amazing friend, Ed Edward, who's behind the camera over there.
Thank you, Ed.
And without Ed's support, this program wouldn't have been able to go on. And to thank you to Adelphi. Hi, my name is John Tucker. I'm at the Racial Justice and Equity Project at the Peace and Justice Center, and today I have a distinguished guest with me, Dr. Lawrence McCrory. Larry, why don't we start off, where are you from, originally? Because I know that's an off-the-asking question that has certain connotations in Vermont. But originally, born?
Born in Philadelphia. Guess what? Same place as you.
Same place as me. And we figured out we both had to go to the same hospital because in those days there was only 2 hospitals black folks could go to.
Mercy Douglas.
It was the black hospital.
That's right.
And the city hospital was the Philadelphia General.
That's right. Anyway, I was born in Philadelphia, and at the age of 2, my family moved to Camden, New Jersey, right across the river. And I grew up actually in Camden. Went to high school there and then left to go to college.
At what college?
University of Michigan, Ann Arbor.
That was a liberating experience, right?
Liberating in what sense? It was one of the most racist experiences that I've ever had. However, a very good school in the sense of education.
Right.
And I had 6 years there altogether. I began there, but then immediately went into the Army.
They called you into the Army?
Yes, and so I served for 2.5 years in the Army, and then went back to the University of Michigan.
Was the Army integrated?
No, that was a colored army, as a matter of fact. No, it was a very segregated army, unbelievably bad, but that's beside the point right now. At any rate, when I got out of the Army, I went back to the University of Michigan. I finished a bachelor's degree in biology in 1949, and then a master's degree in 1950.
And that was in science?
That was in zoology.
Zoology.
Right. And then I went back to Philadelphia.
And what happened in Philadelphia?
I couldn't get a job.
You had 2 degrees.
I had 2 degrees hanging on my wall, but in those days they were not looking for black people with 2 degrees. Let me tell you.
They weren't looking for black people of any kind, right?
No, I know that. Not educated people.
You were in the workforce at the same time my father was.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not that much older than you, John. Please.
My father was older than you.
Aren't we about 2 years apart? At any rate, it's a very interesting experience because I would see a job advertised in the paper, a biologist, for example, and I would call, and of course the name McCrory throws people off. And so they would talk to me beautifully on the phone. And, oh, yes, come in tomorrow.
And what would happen?
10 o'clock, and I'd get there, and the secretary would look up and, in some cases, jump up and run in the back to talk to somebody, and then come back out and say the job's been filled. Or the person in the back with more authority would come out and say, we've looked over your papers. You're too educated for this job. I'm serious. And so the bottom line was that I could not find employment in Philadelphia.
What were you doing?
I parked cars at the Benjamin Franklin Hotel garage.
That's
you know
still
where
there.
that is, at 9th and Walnut. It's still there, as a matter of fact. I went by there not too long ago just to reminisce, if you will. And I parked cars at the Benjamin Franklin Hotel garage. And of course, I had my music. You know, I'm a musician, so I was playing on weekends in Camden at the Dewdrop Inn.
Oh, at the what is that called? That place outside of Camden?
No, that's Lawnside.
Lawnside.
Yeah, I played there too.
Yeah.
But I played
Big Maybell lives there.
I played for 4.5 years at the Dewdrop Inn.
Jesus.
It was wonderful, man.
I was sneaking in.
Probably. At any rate, and then a very interesting thing happened. About 1.5 years into my job of parking cars, I got a call from a person that I've never seen, from the Friends Service Committee.
The American Friends Service.
American Friends Service Committee, a Quaker organization.
Right.
They told me that they were interested in integrating Sharp and Dome, the pharmaceutical house, that had never hired a person of color except as,
How did you feel
as
about
a
that?
janitor. I wanted a job, John. I mean, the bottom line on that one was I wanted a job very badly.
Right.
So I would have done almost anything.
A professional
at that
job
point.
they offered
Yeah,
you.
of course. And they said that they are hiring 8 people, and you're going to be one of them, and we have laid the groundwork, and so forth and so on. And
What happened?
sure enough, I got hired. And I worked at Sharp and Dome for 5 years. At the end of 5 years, or after 5 years, I was called in to the office of the Director of Research, Carl Beyer, wonderful person, very bright pharmacologist, and MD pharmacologist. And he said that the board of directors had decided to do something about for higher education, and the something that they were going to do was to send one person back to school to get a PhD, and that I had been chosen. So I was very fortunate, very lucky to be in that place at that time. I was sent to the University of Illinois College of Medicine in Chicago, and I was there. Actually, I stayed in Chicago for 11 years, but the point was that my whole goal then was to go there, get a PhD, and hurry back to Sharp and Dome. I wanted to work there very badly in research. However, in the course of my getting my degree, I fell madly in love with the whole education thing.
What did you get your PhD in?
In physiology. And in fact, I got a master's degree in physiology, a second master's, and then a PhD in physiology. And I fell madly in love as a graduate student with education. And teaching. And teaching. And so I never went back.
Well, how did you get to Vermont?
I was hired when I finished my PhD, I was hired by the University of Illinois College of Medicine as an assistant professor. And I had gotten my degree under a fellow named Norman Alpert, incidentally one of the best teachers and researchers that I've ever known, and a very good friend of mine. Now, at any rate, I got my degree under him, and so I was working there with him as a fellow faculty member. And then he got appointed to the chairmanship of the Department of Physiology here at the University of Vermont College of Medicine. And he asked me if I would go with him and help him set up a teaching program. By then I had won some teaching awards and I was really into teaching.
What year was this?
1966. I mean, we came in 66. This was in 64, or 65. And so I said that I would go because I wanted to get my family. By that time I had 4 children, a wife and 4 children, and I wanted to get them out of Chicago very badly. I told him I would go and I would give him 5 years. And of course that was 35 years ago or 36 years ago, whatever it's been. So obviously I fell in love with Vermont. At any rate, I came here then with him. That's how I got to Vermont. And I was assistant professor, associate professor, full professor, and then I went over to the president's office and I was associate vice president for academic affairs and then acting vice president for academic affairs. Ultimately, I became dean of the School of Allied Health Sciences, and I retired from there 5 years ago.
Let's go back.
Okay.
Just a bit. You arrived in Vermont. Here
Yes.
you are in Vermont.
Yes.
Connie, your wife.
Connie, Desiree, Lauren, Leslie, and Larry.
Right.
Right.
A compact black family.
Yes.
What was that like?
It's a mixed bag. First of all, it was beautiful being in a place like Vermont in the sense of the sheer beauty of Vermont and the sheer lifestyle of being able to live, for example, in the country. We eventually bought a farm in Charlotte and so forth. And so in that sense, it was just incredibly wonderful. The kids were free. They had horses. They had all the things that they could only dream of living in a city like Chicago, unless one were very wealthy. And of course we weren't. So they could have all these things here. On the other hand, it was very difficult in the sense of dealing with the school system here.
Why? Is it a good place to live?
Yeah. Well, the schools were pretty far behind in terms of multiculturalism. There obviously was a very, very small number of students of color.
But this is a state of progress and liberalism, right?
Yes, I know.
The home of the Underground Railroad.
Yes, I know. And there are many, many, many positive things about Vermont. There were then, as a matter of fact, and there still are. As a matter of fact, there is no place in the United States, I must say this, there's no place in the United States I'd rather live. And I mean that with all my heart. I'm serious about that. On the other hand, it wasn't easy. There were constant fights with the school system, trying to demand justice for my children, trying to see that they were protected. trying to see that they didn't get in trouble, trying to respond to the insults and so forth that were thrown at them. But more importantly, trying to deal with the school administration and their inability to deal with racism.
Go back from the schools for a second, because we'll get back to that. There were some other things that happened in Vermont, as I'm aware of.
Yeah, we got, there were only a few of us here, okay, only a few people of color here, in those days anyway. And we got involved in the social situation and the political situation very early in the game. In those days, of course, there was cakewalk at the university, one of the most racist activities that I have ever seen on a college campus. We fought that one.
These were white fraternities that dressed up?
That dressed up in blackface and did what they described as an athletic exercise of imitating black people, imitating white people, walking 4D cake. I don't really want to get into it too deeply, but there was a pretty racist thing, and many of us, white and black, I must say, were involved in trying to eradicate this thing from the campus. We finally were able to bring that about.
How long did it take?
Well, I don't know how long it had been fought before I got there, but I came in '66, and I think it left in '70. So
4 years.
yeah, and that was constant struggle.
Before that, was there something else about the state that was going on, about the map?
About, oh yeah, the Niggerhead Mountain. Niggerhead Mountain was was an official entry. I mean, it wasn't. Niggerhead Mountain was not an epithet which was just talked. Excuse me.
It was on the map.
But it was on the official state map.
As Niggerhead Mountain and
as
what?
Niggerhead Mountain and Niggerhead Pond in Marshfield.
What part is in Marshfield?
Marshfield, yeah, it's outside of Montpelier, sort of.
So they found another name for this mountain.
They found another name.
What's that mountain called now?
Ultimately, oh my God, I've forgotten. I really have forgotten.
That wouldn't be Camel's Hump, would it?
No.
Because I was just trying to figure out what made it be called that. Was it black on top or something? What was it? Why did they call it that?
I have no idea, John.
They just called it that.
That was its name, okay? And it was an official name. And so we had to fight the state library board over that one. And the fight got pretty vicious at times. But the library board finally gave in and changed the name. I think it's Marshfield, I think, Mansfield. At any rate, I need to give credit to another black person, Otis McCrae, who led that fight. But there was Ken Wibbecan was involved, and I've just reunited with him delightfully because we were friends for many years back then. But Otis McCrae led that fight, and we finally...
How long did that take?
A couple of years. On television, television spots, on radio, shows like this, trying to explain how derogatory and demeaning that was and so forth. I mean, the interesting thing about this country, not just Vermont, but the United States of America, is how long it takes white people to understand when something is demeaning that way. For example, Niggerhead Mountain, it was very, very difficult to help them understand that in point of fact, that was terribly derogatory, demeaning, and very insulting. And one of the points that I made at that time to them was, can you imagine if there were a name on the map like Kike's Peak or Dago Reservoir or Wap Mountain? Can you imagine how fast that would be changed?
So
I mean, how much uproar there would be.
Then what were the responses to this? Historical? I mean, what was their reasons? This is historical? This is what it's always been called?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, yes, more or less. At any rate, it was a tough one. But there was Niggerhead Mountain. There was Cakewalk. There was the Irisburg affair.
Going back to Cakewalk, that's the same thing. They defended that the same way. This is tradition?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You should be proud, they said. I should be proud.
Why should we be proud?
Because they are imitating my people. And therefore, in a sense, bring up their heritage. And so
you know how my comment to that is? And just as an aside, not too long ago, as you know, I've been going through a bout of illness. And I was home, and in my own wedding, they have this station, the historical channel or something, right?
Yes.
You know, the Jolson story.
Yes, of course. Good old Al. Yes.
In what? Blackface.
Oh, yeah. It was part of the whole minstrelsy.
Yeah, and then Eddie Cantor.
Yes.
And I didn't feel honored at all.
Why? This is your heritage, man. Yeah, of course. And that's the point to be made. And yet...
That's my point.
Yes. At any rate, then there was the Irisburg affair. It's another one that we had to,
now, the Irisburg,
band together to fight.
That was
the black minister who moved into Irisburg and whose house was shot into by a kid. A kid went by and shot.
Why did they shoot into the house?
Well, because there were black people living there. I mean, Irisburg didn't have any.
Was that all
people
to
of
it?
Color. I have no idea why the kid shot into it. I would assume that it was sort of a racist event, that we don't want these kind of people in our neighborhood. But that's only the beginning of the story. So his house was shot into. The police investigated it, of course. And in the course of this, the kid went up the block, turned his car around, and came back to fire a second shot. And when he did, the minister had by that time gone and gotten his gun and fired back at the car, as a matter of fact.
The minister got what happened to the minister?
Well, one of the questions that was asked in the hearing after all of this was, why did you shoot back? You're a minister. You're a man of the cloth. I mean, here's a man trying to defend his family, you see, because he had his family, his kids there, his wife there. And he also had, and this was a black family, but he also had a friend of the family who was white, a white woman who had moved here from California with them. They all came together, and they were all living in this house together. Now, here's the rub. And this made national headlines. I mean, Life magazine did a story on this one. It was an embarrassment to the state. At any rate, here's what happened. So, in order to protect the minister, the state police put a guard around his house. They posted state policemen around his house.
Physically posted them.
Physically posted them around his house. Okay.
With weapons.
Yes. And one of the state police claimed that he peeped in the window one night and saw the minister making it, having sexual intercourse with the white woman. Yeah. At that point, the minister was arrested and charged with some law that had been on the books in Vermont.
Which was?
Since 1917 or so.
Which was?
I don't know what it was. A married man having sex with somebody other than a wife.
Adultery.
Well, a form of it, yes.
Wait a minute. Now let's go back. Here we are. This is not Mississippi, Georgia, Louisiana, South Carolina. There's some of these things that happen and some of those names that happened, I would have understood it. This was Vermont.
Yes.
The home of the progressive.
Yes. At any rate.
They had things named Niggerhead Mountain and Pine.
The victim.
They had Cakewalk. They had people shooting in people's houses.
The victim of this shooting became
The minister.
No, became the arrested person. Became the person that was
That's what I
charged
mean.
with a crime. Yes. And
That went on in the South all the time.
yeah, I know. Well, let me tell you that the person who came to the rescue of this whole situation was your friend and mine, Phil Hoff.
Phil Hoff.
Phil Hoff was governor, and Phil Hoff intervened. Probably cost him an election, but that's
Nah.
well, I won't get into that. That's speculation. But in point of fact, had it not been for Phil Hoff, I don't know what we would have done. As a matter of fact, the Ken Wibbuchanan that I just mentioned, he and I went up and along with Roger Albright, who was a minister here, the three of us went up and stayed with Reverend Johnson to show support for him. That's the kind of banding together that we were doing in those days.
So this was no different than what was going on in some places in the South.
That's correct. But that's the nature of racism in America anyway, isn't it? You know, there's an up South and a down South.
That's right.
So we're up South.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the...
And we both were born into the bastion of American freedom.
You know, you and I were born in Philadelphia.
Right.
I grew up in Camden, New Jersey. In Camden, New Jersey, when I was a kid, black people had to sit upstairs in the movie theaters.
That had to go in Philadelphia too.
Okay. So, I mean...
By the time I was born...
Well, there's your north. I mean, there's your up south again. In Atlantic City.
I can remember being 5 or 6 years old going to movies with my parents. I'll tell you the movie, you probably heard of it. It was the Cross Keys out in West Philadelphia.
No, I don't remember.
Predominantly black neighborhood. Black people, there were signs, sat in the balcony.
Well, that's the same thing in Camden, New Jersey. And you know Atlantic City. I mean, I'm sure you went down there.
Oh, we had, what was that, the beach?
It was like 7,
What
8,
they call that beach?
9 miles of beach in Atlantic
But
City.
Kentucky Avenue was...
And black people could only stay in a 1-block area on
Kentucky
the beach,
Avenue.
On the beach, yeah.
Over Kentucky Avenue.
Yeah, if you ventured out of there, you were arrested.
By the time I came along after you,
That's right.
one of the big events was 2 things that I can remember that I had grew up wanting to do. This is about life in America. I wanted to go to the opening of the Harlem Club.
Yes.
On Kentucky Avenue.
Oh, yes.
Which opened on, let me get this right, Easter night.
Okay.
In Atlantic City.
Right.
And the other was to spend a weekend at Labor Day weekend on Kentucky Avenue
Right.
in Atlantic City.
Right.
And all the hotels that you could stay at.
Many people saved up for a whole year.
That's right.
To have 1 week on Kentucky Avenue. That
That's
was
right.
I used to play down there, of course.
I know,
played
sure. The little Belmont.
At Gracie's Little Belmont.
Right.
Right across from Club Harlem.
I grew up.
It was a beautiful culture, actually. I mean, it was segregation at its worst. But on the other hand, we had a beautiful thing going. I mean, among ourselves.
Absolutely.
Among ourselves. I can remember, let me tell you something. I can remember being at a picnic on that same beach in that same block with Sammy Davis Jr. And all of us gathered around eating and so forth, having a good time. And somebody would have a little bit too much to drink. You weren't supposed to drink down there, but of course everybody did. And somebody would have too much to drink and say, I don't give a damn about this thing. I'm going to walk over there, right?
Right.
And the rest of us would just grab him and throw him down in the sand because you know what would have happened to him had he walked outside that 1 block.
Yeah.
Just incredible. Anyway, that's
So,
a
my
way of
point
life.
is-
It's an upbringing.
That's right. And why is it then you feel that it's so important for these things to be squashed and not talked about?
Do I think it's important for them to be squashed?
No, why do you think it's important for them to squash them and not talk about
Oh, well, because...
the establishment?
Well, in the first place, it's an embarrassment, or should be. But I think more importantly, that's the way you maintain a system. See, if you can eradicate the history, you can maintain a system because people, their collective memories sort of fade and new generations come along. And it's important that, number one, this history not be told. Not be told from the white side because of how horrendous it is, and not be told from the black side because then blacks will know from whence they came. And you see, what worries me about this, what worries me about the whole thing, is that this eradication of history, I fear that we are raising a generation of people that are ignorant of history, both white and black. Blacks ignorant of their own history and their own, therefore, sense of self-worth in this whole society.
But don't you think that blacks, a number of them, have gotten into a mold of go along to get along?
Yes, of course. I mean, they've substituted class for race. And they think that by moving up into the middle class, you know, now, oh, I got a home in the country and I got this and I got that, and somehow that insulates them from racism. And they couldn't be wronger, let me tell you. They couldn't be more wrong. Nothing insulates black people from racism in this country. Nothing. It doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter how many degrees you have hanging on you.
And each incident gets played up as an isolated incident.
That's right.
Instead of a continuum.
That's right.
Of behavior.
That's right. And that worries me, because I think that it falls into a mechanism which will perpetuate the system, as opposed to all of us standing up and fighting it. And I think that's what we ought to be doing.
What does it do to our children?
Well, just what I said. It won't do it to my children, and it won't do it to your children, because I'm going to make sure they understand where they came from.
And your children do.
Even though the school won't do that for me. You see, the school will not do that for me. At least I haven't found a school that will do that. So I have to do it myself, and that's okay. I take on that responsibility. I have probably one of the nicest collections, I mean, for a poor person, I'm not poor, but for a person that is not wealthy, I have one of the nicest collection of books on black history that I know of, okay? And you know what? You know why I have it? Primarily because I wanted to educate my children in this regard. I want them to know exactly who they are, of whence they came. Now I have another job. I got a granddaughter, and my daughter and I are working overtime trying to make sure
Let's talk a little bit about that.
She knows.
Let's talk a little bit about your daughter.
My daughter or granddaughter?
Your daughter and the granddaughter.
Okay.
The daughter who had the granddaughter.
Yes.
Who happens to be a friend of mine.
Yes. Leslie.
Leslie.
Absolutely. So proud of her, I don't know what to do.
One of the brightest people I've ever known in my life, and I need to say that. And I've always wondered, here's a kid who kind of grew up in Vermont, who struggled in the school system in Vermont, survived it, went on, worked here, left, came back, committed to living here and changing it, let her own child go to school here for a while, and I'll explain it for a while, and yet has never been asked to take on any position of responsibility that had to do with the schools in Vermont.
Yes.
Don't you find that interesting?
I find it sad because she's an incredible resource. I must say that Governor Dean doesn't feel that way.
She lived it.
He's asked her to be on a number of commissions,
right.
Okay?
I'm not talking about...
But you're talking about the school system.
She's at the age where people, when they get degrees and everything, work, you get paid. That's the American way. That's how the capitalist system works.
Yes.
So if she does a job, why are we always asked to be on commissions and all that stuff? I'm talking about a job that puts her in the knowledge and know-how and able to make some decisions and some influence.
Oh, you're talking about that kind of work?
Yes.
No.
Oh, I mean, work is work, right? But then there are work. There are jobs that are high profile where you have the right to make some changes. You need to be backed up, but you need to institute some changes because you have a working knowledge of what it is you do. And I think, and I don't know how you feel about this, I think that most of those jobs that blacks get in this state, they come from outside the state with companies already or institutions where they get those jobs when they come in.
Well, that's been the history.
Yes.
I mean, as long as I've been here.
But here's a kid who grew up here.
Yep.
Okay? And has never had that offer. She's been asked to be on commissions.
Yep.
She's been asked to testify.
Yep. Okay, I mean, I have
get my
nothing to
point?
say. Of course I get your point. Of course I get your point, and I have nothing to add to it. I mean, it's self-evident.
See, my suspicions about that, Larry, my experiences in Vermont, have led me to believe that I think our education system in Vermont, with such an overwhelming majority of one group of people, would have a hard time relating to that, because they've never had the experience of being under that kind of leadership. It was hard enough for you at your institution when you got those jobs. But the institutions that you went to work for were in a self-contained area. Students came there for a certain amount of stuff. You understand what I'm saying?
Of course I understand.
But I'm talking about public policy.
No, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, you may well be right. I have no argument. I have no argument against what you're saying, and I rather think you are right. The only, and I mean this, the only negative in terms of Vermont that has to do with the decision to be here is the school system. In retrospect, I'm sorry that I stayed. As far as the school system is concerned.
I think that the hardest thing you've done in your life, and knowing you as many years as I have, is that decision you made to stay here.
Well,
and
I didn't think it was hard at the time.
Right.
Because I didn't know how horrendous.
But we look back at our lives, all of us do.
But as I look back, that's the only thing that I feel badly about.
I understand
I did my children a terrible disservice by keeping them in the state. Now, my daughter is not as dumb as I am.
Why do you say that?
Because she just took my granddaughter out of the school system and took her down
to Connecticut. She did that last year in the middle of the school year.
Right.
And
she just left today to take her back.
And your granddaughter went to school where her father lives.
Right.
In Connecticut.
Right.
Where he's a teacher.
Right. He's at Yale.
And a professor.
Right. And so my daughter is moving there. And
so you just didn't lose your daughter.
No, I lost my granddaughter and daughter, and I'm delighted. Not delighted, that's the wrong word. No, I'm not delighted. I agree with what's going on.
How do you feel, though? What does it do to you?
It tears me up on the inside. But it also tears me up.
This is your only grandchild.
Yeah, I know. But there's more to it than that. I mean, that's at one level. What really tears me up is that in seeing my daughter have the courage and the conviction that it takes
to make this kind of decision.
To make that decision, I feel badly that I didn't do it, you see.
Well,
and I should have done it. I should have gotten my kids out of here.
I'm a parent.
As far as the school system is concerned.
I'm a parent also, just like you are.
And that's just one of the things that I have to live with, and that's okay. You know, I can listen.
I was more fortunate than you in some ways. My career took place in places where I had different choices to make. I don't know what my choices would have been made if they had been laid at my feet, given the scarcity of opportunity in certain fields for black Americans as they existed for yourself first and me as a generation.
Right.
Okay? And the price that we all paid so that the kind of fake integration, that's what I call it, that goes on now. And then what I find interesting with all these steps that have been made, some 30 years later, your daughter still has to make the decision to ensure your granddaughter's education and safety.
Well, that's incredible.
Yes.
That's incredible because 30 years ago, I was arguing with the school system about how my kids were being treated and miseducated, okay? 30 years later, here my daughter and I are arguing with the school system about the very same things as far as my granddaughter was concerned. Now that, to me, ain't progress, I'm sorry.
Your daughter, Leslie, who I happen to know about, has a degree in education and a master's in education?
No, she's working on a master's now.
Okay. But it would seem to me she knows a little bit about the school system, how it works in Vermont, how it doesn't work.
She probably understands it better than most people
That's
who are
my
in the
point.
school
And
system.
I'm going to go back.
I'm serious. I'm not
I'm going to
kidding.
go back to that point
Well.
again because I think it's
I'm
important.
not trying to get her a job.
I'm
John.
not trying to get her a job, but I'm trying to show Larry from the work that I do
Yeah.
the lack of understanding and commitment by people who make decisions in this state
Okay.
around policy and education. And it's a very serious problem.
You know what's really serious and sad about it is we are talking, we're not doing this, but the implication of what we're saying is that there's something wrong with the school system as far as the education of children of color is concerned. And what I'm saying, and I know what you're saying is, there's something wrong with the school system as far as education of all children.
Absolutely.
Because white kids are as damaged by this absence as are children.
And
of
poor
color.
white kids are the ones who get it the worst.
Listen, it's very, very sad. And so here goes the perpetuation of racism, because there is no focus on anti-racism. No focus.
You mean diversity is not the same as racism?
It's a nice way to duck the issue.
That's right.
I mean, and believe me, I believe in diversity.
I do too.
Okay? I mean, I fought for it like crazy at the University of Vermont. It's a very, very important component.
I believe everybody should sit at the table.
Okay.
Gays, women, the whole thing that diversity is about.
That's right.
Asians.
And the viewpoints of everybody.
Everybody should be taken into consideration.
Absolutely true.
But then don't turn around and tells me that because we have diversity, that means that that's necessarily the end of 450 years of the most vicious racism in the history of the world.
No, it's a step in the right direction. But
That's all.
It's necessary but not sufficient.
That means some groups get in and other groups are left out.
It means a lot of things.
Because racism,
not,
we're talking about a color-based situation.
Yeah, we're talking about a whole different concept. But the failure of schools to deal with these issues, I think, is detrimental to every student in that school, not just students of color.
Well,
I mean, let me just
yes.
give you one, and I know I've said this many, many times, and I apologize to your audience, for being redundant.
It's not my audience, it's your audience too.
But just one example of 50 that I could give you off the top of my head. A black girl, a student, okay, goes to school on the bus. Every day, she's hammered with all the pejoratives you can think of, nigger, coon, whatever it is. Every day ends in tears. Eventually, she gets to a point where she doesn't want to go to school anymore. The experience is just too horrendous. Her mother is down at the school every day complaining about this. Nothing happens, no response. After about 6 months or so, the school finally decides to respond. And here's their solution to the problem.
I know
They
it.
took that child off of that school bus and put her on a special education bus. Okay, now, number one, that child is destroyed, because that child now has to internalize the fact that she is the problem. I am the problem. And if they just remove me from the situation, everything is okay. So I am the problem. My color is the problem. That's one, and that's terrible destruction. Two, what message do the white kids on that bus get?
What message do they get?
They get the message, I know how to get rid of these black people. If you call them nigger long enough, they disappear. There's a solution. Look at that. She's gone.
And
Now-
there's no repercussions if I do that.
Of course. Now, the point that I want to make is, I'm a parent and you're a parent. Is that the message that parents of these white kids want them to get?
Is that the message? Can that message
it's a heck of a
change from
question.
diversity training?
No,
That's my point.
no, of course not.
There's
The
nothing that
schools
annoys
have
me
to
more
deal with racism
as an issue.
as an issue.
And separate from diversity.
And that means anti-racism training.
That's right.
It
and
means education.
Diversity coordinator is one thing, anti-racism coordinator is a whole other issue.
Okay.
And I keep watching black people now sign on thinking they're going to change race by taking on a title of diversity.
Okay, now you keep asking about my daughter. Let me tell you something that I didn't say. That's why she can't get a job.
That's right. Because she makes that distinction.
She makes that distinction, and she's made it verbally in many conferences and so forth.
And my problem with that, if you're going to do diversity. But don't think diversity is going to change or make a undercut race. It's not. It's not.
You know, digital, when they were here, wiped out racist and sexist language in the workplace in 1 year. And they didn't do it with diversity. They did it by saying it will not be accepted. The CEO said the expectation of every worker in this place is an absence of racist and sexist language. And if you can't live up to that, you're out of here. Now that ain't diversity. That's not bringing in different colors people. I mean, that is establishing policies which say it ain't gonna work anymore. Now, what's interesting about that is that the one change in the school system which I have seen, which is documented in these 30 years that I'm talking about, is an anti-harassment policy. And that's very important. I'm not putting that down. But every school now has on the wall a statement of anti-harassment policy.
Of course that's important.
Unfortunately, it's on the wall. Nothing happens, John. In too many instances, nothing happens. Oh yes, I know about that school teacher, but she's been here for a long time, and so forth and so on, and she doesn't understand these issues, and so forth and so on. In the meantime, children are being destroyed.
Let me tell you one of the things that I object to as they pander for their school budgets every year. I sit there. I'm no longer, my kids are, you know, gone out of here. My grandchildren don't go to school here. But, you know, the taxes I do pay and everything. And I have not yet, in 8.5 years, seen any serious consideration by school boards to attack this problem. But yet, they have the right to get on me to make me want to increase their budget, to increase and let the racism that exists in their school go on. And see themselves as well-meaning people and get angry when you say, but nothing changes. And I want to think about something. The Surgeon General just recently came out with a statement about race and what in this country?
You mean health care?
Yes.
Oh my goodness, well that's certainly nothing new. All of us have been screaming that for a very, very long time. And as a matter of fact, Margaret Heckler, when she was the head of Health and Human Services, and this is what, 15 years ago now, or something like that, did an enormous study in which she showed, documented all the way up and down the line, that people of color are done in by the racism in the healthcare system. That there are disparities which are just unbelievable. All documented. People understand these things.
So these kids being attacked in these schools racially, there's other behaviors that manifest themselves later. That's what this study for this Surgeon General did.
Oh yeah,
it causes mental health problems.
Well, see, the mental health thing. I mean, I did grand rounds in the Department of Psychiatry some years ago now, in which I documented. I don't mean people have documented. I reported the documentation of incredible racism in the whole mental health system. I mean, misdiagnosis, mistreatment, people, white people, for example, with a certain set of
values.
No, with a certain set of symptoms are classified, for example, as bipolar, affective disorder. And they're put on a drug and they do very well in terms of recovery. And black people with exactly the same symptoms, exactly the same, all documented, are diagnosed as schizophrenic, and they're put on these neuroleptic drugs, and they're made zombies. Now that's racism. That's racism.
And that's not
in the worst possible form.
And that's not counting why it's such a terrible thing on the shortage of graduate schools for blacks to go in.
No. That's a whole nother avenue.
But it means that what's their chances of adequate treatment?
Of course. Well, listen. I mean, there are articles on this. I mean, this is in the literature, for goodness sake. It's not just Poussin. I mean, there are
Hugh Butts.
Yes, of course. They've been saying that for years. But there are white authors now reporting these things. There are people who are saying.
Let me stop you right there. Why I'm bringing this up. We live in a state that has an overwhelming majority white population.
Yeah.
And these children are being attacked. Why hasn't someone come up with the idea that this is at least a public health problem?
I don't know.
I know that you and I have.
You've said it enough times, and
so have you.
And so have I. Because it is a public health problem.
We have a governor who's a doctor.
Yep.
Maybe it's time for us to say it to him again.
Well, that's okay with me.
Because,
I mean,
what I hear the Surgeon General saying.
Yes.
But you and I have been aware of it. I remember you and I laughing a few years ago about them spending $30 million, and the New England Journal of Medicine came out with a study that showed that there was a direct correlation between race and hypertension.
Right.
And you and I laughed and said, we could have saved them about $26 million.
with a much smaller study, of course.
Right, with a much smaller study. And we would have proved that a long time ago.
Yeah.
And so I worry in a state like Vermont. As nice a place it is, it's a great place for me. It's a great place for you now. Our children are grown and so forth. It's a beautiful place to live. It's easy in a lot of ways. But the fact of the matter, there's this undercoating of all this propaganda that they put out. What a great place, what nice people we are. And my thing is, if you're nice people and you're such a great place, then you have a responsibility to address the ills. And when you don't.
Well, the problem with that is
it becomes the tyranny of the majority.
I don't have to say anything. I mean, the problem is that nobody's the wrong word. The majority of people will not even begin to try to understand what a sickness racism is. So they'll tell you two things. They'll say, first of all, I'm not racist. And secondly, racism is not an illness. It's an attitude. It's a whatever.
It's a system.
It's a system, and it is. But individual racism, I believe, is an illness. It's a mental illness.
Those are bigots we're talking about.
No.
When I talk about racism, I'm talking about the institution of racism.
Well, when I'm talking about racism, I'm talking about the institution. No, but I'm also talking about individual racism.
Okay.
And I'm not talking about so-called, I'm not talking about the guys in Montana. I'm not talking about the ball,
right.
You know, I'm not talking about the KKK. I mean, I'm talking about them too. I'm talking about Joe Citizen.
Who uses racism to his advantage?
Of course. I mean, white people have to come to understand that they are a part of a racist system, whether they want to be or not. I mean, it's a whole privilege thing. There is white privilege. Peggy McIntosh has documented this over and over and over again. And so people, if they are white, have a certain set of privileges that come to them just because they are white, whether they want them or not. In the same way that men, and I'm included, have a set of privileges just because I'm masculine. But society gives these to me.
How many white people can you admit, well, can you get to admit that they have privileges that other people don't have?
Oh, I know.
Look at the court rulings that are coming down.
I know 6. I can name 6.
I can maybe name 4.
We're joking about this too much because it's a very serious thing, and until whites can admit that the system in fact favors them, that they have privileges and so forth, then we'll never get any place. You see, that's why those
You mean
things,
black folks shouldn't change the system?
well, that's why, look. Remember President Clinton trying to have these conferences on race and so
Dialogues.
forth? Dialogues on race. That's why those things couldn't work. You first have to understand that you're sick. You first have to understand that you're defective in somehow before you can come to the table and talk to people who you say are defective.
But I also thought that they didn't work because that they were disingenuous. They weren't very honest.
Well, of course. But then that's, look.
And don't ask me to stroke you and make you feel better when you've just committed acts of racism against me and my family.
Right. Right.
That's like asking a woman who's been beaten by a man to go back to him and live with him.
Yes.
And say he really loves you. You just got to give him another chance.
But that's part of what I'm talking about.
Yes.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. And until we can come to the table as equals with a good understanding of the system and how it has affected each one of us, then we'll never get any place talking to each other. Because we don't understand what in the world the other person is saying.
And diversity training is not going to change that.
No, that won't do it. No, diversity training just gets us to a position where we can now
sit down.
Sit down. That's right. That's right. But it doesn't allow us to talk to each other. You've got to have more education, in quotation marks, than that. I don't want to call it training.
And I'm sure black Americans and Native Americans can tell you with great things. It's not just white people that are racist.
Well, it depends on what your definition of racism is.
That's right. There are other people who depend on a racist institution to get ahead of other groups of people.
Yeah, of course.
You know?
Of course.
And so consequently, that's why I think that they need to have diversity training.
But we've been pitted against each other, John.
Absolutely.
I mean it's a...
And I worry about that.
In a sense, it's an unfair criticism because the system, the racist system in the United States has pitted Hispanics against blacks, against Native Americans.
And Asians against them.
And as a matter of fact, against poor whites.
Absolutely.
Okay? So if these groups could ever get together, it would be an incredible force. However, that's not the way the system is rigged. The system is rigged in such a way that we're going to fight each other continually over scarce resources while white America goes on with business.
Who was it that described it as being crabs in a barrel?
I don't know. My grandfather used to
clawing over one another.
Of course.
Tearing one apart.
And so it's a rough row to hoe, and
the guy who wrote Faces at the Bottom of the Well.
Derek Bell.
Right.
And I'm more and more inclined to agree with him that we'll never solve this problem. Not in this country. I don't believe we can.
Can you solve it in Vermont?
You know, that's a very sad thing because I honestly believe.
We argue about this constantly.
I honestly believed that we could solve this problem in Vermont.
And I'm going to tell you why I think we can't.
No, I know. I mean, you told me then. But go ahead. I mean, I'm not trying to cut you off.
We got 3 minutes. It's too small and too incestuous, and conversations go like this. Yes, he did that or she did that, but I know them. They do their lawn every day. They're good people.
Yeah, I know.
So go ahead.
When I say
I
say solve the problem, I don't mean wipe out racism. Hell, we'll never do that. But solve the problem in sort of a functional sense. For example, years ago, do you know who the chief of police was years ago? Kevin Scully?
Right.
Okay. Years ago, we sat and we talked about the fact that we still have time, We still have time to get on top of this problem, all right?
Right.
The cities have lost it already, okay? We still can do it. And Kevin Scully had me talking to the police,
Right.
Dolores Sandoval talking to the police, ran all kind of things. We were getting on top of things. Now, look at what has happened. Profiling. All these things are with us. The cities we have caught up with the cities.
That's because we have a new chief.
Well, I don't want to get into that. But the point is, I honestly had hope that here in Vermont, because of its small size and so forth and so on, and because of such a high proportion of people of goodwill, we could in fact get on top of these things and ward them off before we ever got mired down in them, and we failed.
Okay, we have 1 minute. Would you like to say something in closing?
No, I've said
We're going
it.
to continue this conversation
I've
in
said
another
it.
talk.
I've said it. I'm very distressed, John.
I know that.
Very distressed. I'm very disappointed.
And the struggle has to continue.
Of course the struggle has to continue. We'll never stop that. We'll never
have
go
1
back
minute.
to where we were. Never.
I think all of you agree with me who are going to watch this and see this, that Dr. McCrory has a lot of things to share with us and that we need to continue this. But I'm going to tell you something that I learned a long time ago. You can't appease a bully with a caress. Stop asking people of color to treat their abuser like women are asked to do it. There is no returning to polite talk once you've beat me and humiliated me and misused me. Let's take these things in consideration, and it's time for us all to sit down and have some honest talk. This is a serious problem. I want to thank you for watching this program. If you have any questions, please forward them to the Peace and Justice Center. Dr. McCrory and I will be glad to answer them, and we'll be back on the air again. Thank you for your attention. Thank you to the Peace and Justice Center for having us.
And thank you, John.
Thank you, Larry. Once again, we will be involved in this to the day we die.
I think so.
I think so, too. Okay.